Well, welcome to the Top M&A Entrepreneurs Podcast. Today, my guest is Ryan Tansom, runs a company called Arcana. Let me just tell you, he ran a company, $21 million, sold that 8 figures. He's got a podcast called Intentional Growth. This has over 300,000 downloads. Ryan, thanks for joining the show.
John, I'm super pumped to be here. I'm already excited based on the couple conversations we had right before we hit record.
Yeah. Well, I like what you're doing because you're so far ahead of me of creating this audience around yourself and helping people and then spending absolutely no money on ads and then getting business and deal flow.
Yeah, that about sums it up.
Yeah. So tell me, how did this start? Let's go wind back to the family business and what was it? How did you get involved? And then, like, what was the responsibility? Like, oh, your dad or whoever it was said, "Hey, start taking over. You got a sharp mind."
So this is back early 90s. My dad mortgaged our house, bought $250,000 of old used Panasonic copiers. Oh yeah, he was a copier sales guy. So he went off on his own to do that, and then sold them all on the 30-day terms. And I said that kind of the rest is history. And he was one heck of a grinder, an entrepreneur. And so I was in the business, John. So my way of working or getting the narratives when I was younger was like at 9 o'clock, my dad would come home and I'd get the play-by-play of what happened, like when he got the Canon licensing, when he opened up the next branches. So like my whole childhood, John, was inside of that business. I mean, I was doing meter reads before copiers were actually plugged into the internet, and you actually had that an odometer. I'd have to call people and be like, "Hey, what's your print volume?" So that way we could bill you. And of course, they'd lie and not answer and all. But anyways, I was in.
Because I can come down and get you some copier.
Yeah, exactly.
What is that? $3,000 an ounce or something?
Oh my gosh, yeah. There used to be, that was such a lucrative business back in the day. It was ridiculous. And one of my biggest paychecks for income, not on any kind of other deal, was like literally selling copiers. But worked in another business my whole life. 2009, the crash happens. I swear to my grave I'm never going to go work for him. But I decided to because there was like nothing to do. He was very distant from the company. So essentially the Cliff Note version is, John, I jumped in, had a blissful 8 months of like just selling, but then I was jumping into a CPA and a banking meeting with him, and we lost a lot of money that year, just like everybody else. And the
nice time to come in.
Yeah, woo! And then for the years going forward, it was all about, hey, remember back in the day when there was a bunch of money in this business?
Yeah.
So, anyways, it was a 6-year turnaround. So it was new year, like we sold a couple of the branches to different competitors for cash. We built out a new ERP system, built out the managed IT services, got to this point where we didn't know what to do with the business because we couldn't align our goals with the business's goals. Sold the company in 2014. And that just set on my 8-year track to where we are today of like, what the heck was that? How do I learn as much about M&A as possible so I can take control over and I can help people essentially give them the fishing rod so they can learn how to fish. They can write their own narratives. It's kind of like what you're doing on your show, right? Like M&A is a completely different way of growing a business and thinking about business than just revenue, which is what so many people just focus on.
Yeah. I get a lot of reach outs. I can't remember the marketplace that, hey, if you're looking for podcast guests, and my title is Top M&A Entrepreneurs. And I get say, hey, I think this guy would be a great podcast guest on your show. Like, well, I only have one criteria, and that's you grow your business through acquisition. Would that be the case? No, we just do organic.
Well, it's you know what the difference is, John, from what I've seen from all the people that go through our training or the hundreds of episodes that I've done is the moment someone shifts their mindset away from solving for annual income, which my dad and I did with the $20 million business, which how much money can we take out of this company every year? And they shifted to, hey, what the heck is this thing worth? And how do we grow the value of this asset? It's a completely different game. It's like going from checkers to 3D chess. And it takes a special like circumstance or an experience or something to get someone into that new paradigm shift where then they can go, hey, I can actually buy a company with a certain amount of capital and grow the entire portfolio of assets instead of just launching a new product line. It's a completely different way of thinking.
How many of the deals have you worked on like that now?
So the way our business is structured, we had a bunch of deals in our company. Like I said, we sold a couple of the branches, sold the business in 2014. And then my partner has been through dozens and dozens of acquisitions. And our business, we've got a training program where we've had hundreds of business owners go through it, which teaches about valuations and exits and all this stuff. Yeah. And then a fractional CFO business. So our CFOs will run through, do acquisitions for our clients, go through the eventual sale if they want to sell, whether it's an ESOP, private equity. So, I mean, I'm not directly involved in a bunch of deals anymore, but it's more of like our CFOs, if they're on a team or a company, they each have about 4 or 5, they'll do the deals for our clients. So I'm involved and I'm seeing them all day long.
Yeah. Well, I mean, that's part of moving up in management. You set that structure and template in place.
Well, it's fantastic. I mean, you get to see inside of the financials of all these companies, just like a PE firm. I mean, if you really think about it.
How do you, the question I have for you is, how do you find a willing, receptive, and then somebody that actually puts the time in, to say, okay, I want to grow, and this is what I want my valuation to be at the end, and have a life-changing exit. Who is that person avatar look like?
That is the golden question, isn't it?
That's the golden question. I mean, if I could just identify this, I can go out and look for them, right?
So we can go off on like about a 5-minute tangent if you want, because it's a tangent I think is valuable for this point. Is I tried for 6 years to figure that out. And it through, like, I went and got my value building certification, my certified value growth advisory certification. I got exit.
Is that John Warlow's group?
Yeah, one of them is him, and then Ken Sangenario and the Exit Planning Institute. All of this stuff, and then I was consulting. Here's what I learned after burning through a lot of cash and trying to figure this out in a lot of time: is the words exit planning pisses a lot of people off because they don't. They don't. I think inherently they know that their company's not worth what it should be worth. So they're not ready to even think about it, talk about it. What happened was, John, I was sitting there in our program before it was called Intentional Growth. Our book was on someone's desk, and he goes, I can't even put your guys' training material on my desk in my office because it said growth and exit planning. I was like, oh my God. I'm like, we just can't, like, they can't. I had people asking to like send me emails from different emails. I'm like, this is not about selling. This is about growing a valuable asset that gives you choices. So what happened was, going back to your question, we went through the story brand framework with Donald Miller a couple of years ago, my partner and I, and we rebranded it to intentional growth, because it's about shifting your mindset to grow a valuable asset that creates choices for you long term. So what happens is the people that, when we did that, John, it went from fighting ground, like essentially hand-to-hand combat, to exponential growth, because entrepreneurs that are trapped, they wake up every day and they have the same repeated problems, same friction, same tension. They know that they're not progressing. They know that what their company's doing right now is probably not worth enough money for them to be okay, but they don't know where to turn to. They're talking to different advisors. And really, universally, what it is, they don't understand valuations and what creates value. Like if you and I bought a piece of commercial real estate, it's kind of obvious like what you need to do to grow the value of that building. In a business, it's not an easy roadmap. So the whole goal is to get that person, that avatar, when they're unbelievably confused as shit, asking lots of questions and frustrated because they're in Vistage, they try an EOS, they're working with other people, and they still know that they're not moving towards the goals that they want.
Yeah, I'll tell you my experience. I reach out to a lot of people on LinkedIn. That's kind of where I find.
I saw that. Yeah.
But and you could talk to somebody that's been working in their business for 5 years, and it's $2.5 or $5 million, and they said you start having this conversation about how they can grow 50% or 100%, it breaks their brain. So it's like, that is too early, which was my point of this conversation. It's almost too early, because it's going to be another year before he understands, like, well, if I'm going to have an exit, I got to do all these things, like be bigger.
Well, 100%. And it's not too early for anybody. We've had people go through our training, and it's 5 principles. It's a framework based on 5 principles that we created, just how to think about this stuff. We don't tell anybody what to do. It's like, hey, here's how all this stuff works together. And there's a framework for that. And so we've had people from like or $500,000 in revenue to 190 million in revenue go through our training.
No way, really? 190 million in revenue. Wow.
Yep. I mean, small, very lucrative business, but like still their question was, what is this thing worth? How do I grow it to be worth more? And what are my choices? I mean, he's essentially in the process of building a family office. So that's a whole different kind of end of the spectrum. But like, regardless of whether they're at in the timeline of selling their company, either like tomorrow or in 20 years, we've got a couple of people more towards my age where like they've got one guy, he's acquired, 5 companies in the last few years. And he's got, 4 pieces of commercial real estate and he wants to be worth $40 million by the time he's 50. Okay.
So where did he start?
He started with a lot of questions like, what are these things worth? What am I supposed to do with them?
Yeah.
How do I use my cash? How do I take my growth rate and like what I'm going to like grow with my income statement and then tie that to like, what does that mean for cash? What does that mean for my distributions? What does that mean for my ability to buy other companies? So like after like all of that, then he's like, well, I'm going to create a holding company. I've got 9 entities underneath that. After the working capital, all the capital flows to the top and then they acquire more companies.
Yeah.
So it was really, to your question, confusion and disappointment with the lack of meaty answers they're getting from other people. And now these, I was listening to a couple of your shows, like entrepreneurs have a vision and they've got really good ideas, but it's very difficult for them to take those ideas and actually put those into the 3 financial statements and project them forward to actually understand what the heck it means to them financially.
Yeah.
Now and into the future.
Yeah. Well, I had a great interview with this guy and he says, if you start here and you want to go here, like, what needs to be true for me to get to this spot? And most of the times you don't have the map to get there. So you have to go start asking a lot of people who have been to $100 million company to get there, like, and work backwards. But hey, you just can't knock on somebody's door going, hey, you're doing 100 million. Can you spend some time with me?
Well, and I agree with that last comment, and that's a good reason to start a podcast. But
yeah,
there's actually doesn't need to be that complicated because every company has 3 financial statements. Every single company. Apple does, I do, so do you. Income statement, balance sheet, cash flow statement. If you actually tie those together and you start with the income statement, say what kind of sales do I have to do and what kind of line items? What is the cost of goods of each of those line items that need to be after all the stuff that I do? How much cash ends up at the end of the day, end of the month? And then if I take my strategies and I put those in, it's just a bunch of assumptions. We started our business 3 years ago, and we're exponentially growing, and we've hired 9 people in the last 8 months, or maybe it's been 7. Anyways, all of that is built out from the income statement, from the actual sales and capacity planning to say, if we hit these numbers, then how do we build to get there so we don't run out of cash? Because like I did a presentation for Vistage a couple months ago, John, and very large companies. This group specifically was a couple $100 million. So raise your hand if you can see into the future, all 3 statements tied together, your growth rate, your distributions, your taxes, and the value of the business and the net proceeds, internal rate of return 2 years up, not one hand. And so those are big, sophisticated.
And who was the in the audience? What was the role? Like CEO or president or founder?
And owner. Yep. Yeah. 3rd generation. Or president. One president, actually, the most sophisticated person in that group. The president was a non-family member, and his comp plan was completely tied to working capital. I was like, oh, that's interesting.
Yeah, that's scary. Exactly. Like working capital is in a ship sitting off of LA.
All right.
Yeah,
exactly. Yeah, maybe his comp plan might be a little hard to execute, but I think going back to your point of from 0 to 100 million, how do I get there?
Yeah,
it's going to be a combination of a good business and a good strategy, and then if you're going to think about through acquisitions, an investment thesis, and then how are you going to fund that growth to get there? It's really just, it's not as complicated as people think it is. It's just hard work.
Let's go back to the 5 things that you guys talk about. Like, what are those 5 things that you work on?
So we call them the 5 intentional growth principles. And the reason I started creating these about 6-7 years ago, John, is I'd be sitting down consulting with someone that's looking to sell or looking to buy. And I'd be like, I'm like, you just don't, we have to like take a pause and step all the way back and go, okay, here's how all this stuff fits together. So then we can have a good conversation. So these 5 principles that go in order And the first one is your drivers. What do you want from this business and why? Legacy, community, disrupting industry, family, I don't care. We have to really.
Are those similar? Like after talking to 1,000 people, are these almost the same thing?
Well, everybody's got different, like you might be different from me versus someone else, but like the process to think about it and reflect, I don't care what you want, but you need to determine what you want. Otherwise we can't get a deal done and we can't grow this company. Second principle is your.
Well, let me go back to that. Yeah. Is it ever too late to say, well, somebody's got, you're 60 and you want to dunk the basketball? Well, maybe not. Right.
I agree, but I'll tell you what, if you had, stage 2 cancer, you want to know what stage 2 or stage 4? Yeah. I don't know, man. I would like, unless you can look up in the mirror and see what's going on. And actually, let me tell you an exact example. I'll tell you a story after I tie these all together about a guy that's in his late 60s about what he's doing about that specific topic. Yeah. So second principle is your financial targets. There are 3 of them. What is your target annual income, no matter what your ownership structure is? So if it's 200 grand in income for life, okay. Then you've got your second target, which is your net worth outside the business. It's just because that matters on your choices. If you have nothing outside the business, you're going to have to maximize certain things to get to your wealth. The third financial target is the value of your business net today, and always measuring what that net would be. So enterprise equity. And then truly, if you sold it today, you don't have to sell it, but as an investor, if you sold this, what would it be worth? And you can track and measure that. So you have an idea of that gap. So how long do you have to go?
And let me ask you about the valuation. Do you value that you have the skills, tools to value the business today and say, here's where they're at, or do they do that themselves?
Yeah. So the training, we just go through case studies. If someone has one of our CFOs involved, we build the entire financial plan with the statements, tie in the valuation, roll in their strategies to the future. So like the CFO is the actual executing.
Oh yeah, right. You got that. Yep. Yeah.
So if you think about principle 1, what do you want? Principle 2, what are your financial targets? Now we're going, okay, what is the possibilities with this business long term? So that's where exit options come into play. And we bucket them, John, into 5, and there's an infinite amount of ways to do this. But we just said, okay, like categories that have certain attributes that are similar. The first one is internal, family, partners, family partners. I mean, you got any different ways that you can do internal transfers, management buyouts. Then there's the second option, which is search funds and acquisition entrepreneurs, which I know you've had, I think Walker Dibble on the show. And I mean, we got a bunch of people that we know that are in the acquisition entrepreneur space.
Yeah.
Then there's the third exit option, which is ESOPs, selling to your employees through a stock ownership plan. The fourth option is private equity. And then the fifth is strategic, like a competitor. And, half the strategics are backed by private equity nowadays. But anyways, these 5 give you insights on deal structures, how the value of the company is going to be valued, your role of your job, pre and post closing. So you go, what do I want? What are my financial targets? Okay, here are my options. And as people round the third principle, they're going, got it. Now I want to shift my mindset to grow value, which is principle number 4.
Yeah, that's the customer. The possibilities are the customer in mind.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. Do you guys does it ever come up where it said you're working on an ESOP? The guy goes, I really wanted to give it to the employees because I love them. They've been around 20 years. But was there ever a case where you're competing using one of these situations to find out to get the best price for this?
Oh, for sure.
Business owner?
Yeah. It depends on what they want. Around the 5th principle, and then I'll tell that story and then we'll dive into what you just said. Because the fourth principle is increase value. And that's by creating sustainable, predictable, and transferable cash flow. So you're de-risking your cash flow to grow the multiple. So, and you're rolling your strategic plan into your financials and you're de-risking that cash flow to grow the multiple by de-risking the company. The 5th principle is your team of advisors. So that way you're surrounding yourself like with people like yourself that get it, that have been through deals and that can optimize the tax plan, the estate plan, the deal structure, the financing, but you're the one telling them, hey, this is what I want versus relying on everybody else to tell you what you want. So here goes the story. So we had a gentleman, he has about a $15 million manufacturing firm, goes through the training. He's got 70 employees, owned the company for 30 years. He's like Mr. like culture, community, two of his daughters in the business, two of his daughters out of the business. His wealth manager said, hey, by the way, the company's worth $7 million. How many times you've seen this? Where did you get that? Is the first question.
Can you tell me how you arrived at that? Yeah.
Which dart did you pull out of your mouth? And so, well, after going through the training and him like understand the principles, he said, well, I've got about 1.1 in EBITDA. So it's worth about $5.5 million. Debt, taxes, I'd only walk away with $2.5 million. That's $5 million short than his $7 million financial freedom number that he was told. Yeah. So he went, oh shit. Well, because he first principle drivers is he was like, community, legacy focus, family. If he sold, he'd have to do what I did, which is maximize purchase price and sacrifice a lot of your first principle drivers, which makes you unhappy. You might have satisfied your second principle financial targets, your wealth, but at the cost of everything that you thought you were building for. So he said, hell with that. He shifted his mindset. He was 67 at the time. Now he's in his 70s.
Let me ask you about that. Do they go through the 5 stages of grief when they go, it's not worth 70, it's worth 5 or 6?
Yeah. It's really painful to watch people's face, man. Like I've had, who is victim to this a lot are doctors and CPAs and just different things. Where like there was a guy that was a doctor going through our training, 50 employees, physician, and everybody was supporting him. And he got cancer actually in the middle of our training. No joke. And he found out that, this thing's worth $4.5 million. And I'm like, well, dude, it's you and 49 other people. Like, what am I supposed to do? I'm not a doctor. Right. And so just like, and hadn't saved a penny for his entire life. A lot of really cool stuff. And so like, it's painful to watch that. Cause it's kind of like us just showing through cases. Like, here's how it all works. Like, sorry. Like you could maybe get a huge purchase price out of this if you got a strategic buyer, pinned a couple people against each other, but there's like, hopefully that works because there's not a lot of plan Bs. But like, I want to give you going back to that story.
Yeah.
He said, okay, this is where that shift in the mindset happened. Like I was telling you about, he said, instead of focusing on top line revenue, I'm going to grow my value of the company. I'm going to increase my EBITDA from 1.1 to 2 million. I'm going to take my enterprise value from 5.5 million to then 12 based on de-risking the cash flow, increasing the multiple. And he paid down $1.5 million in debt in the first 12 months after going through the training.
Did that come from cash flow or did he issue equity or something or what? Yeah.
No, well, he focused on it. He focused on paying down debt, and then he was investing in ERP systems, his management team, the strategic plan, the financials to de-risk his cash flow to make it more sustainable at the same time. So invest in the right things, pay some debt down. And then his goal was, I want to do an ESOP in year 3. And literally went from a $5.5 million valuation to 12. He increased his EBITDA, increased the multiple, paid down some debt. It's like he's pre-engineering exactly what he wants because he knew what he wanted and he knew how he was going to go do it instead of just waking up every day and just fighting fires and not knowing what they're doing.
Like, I want to sell, right?
The amount of times people call me and they're like, hey, Ryan, I just want out. Like, out of what? Your job or your asset?
Or life. Are you going to jump off the bridge or what? What do you want out of?
Yeah, exactly. And they don't even know how to answer. And I'm like, well, if you want out of your company, that's just finding a way to monetize that. And if you're doing $1 million in EBITDA and clipping coupons, I was listening to one of your shows, like, why would you want to sell? Well, it might be industry risk. Well, that's an investor thinking about why you want to diversify. Usually 9 out of 10 times they have a job, a lot of stress. They haven't built a structure where they can be the investor. They're still stuck in the company. So they want out of their job. It happens almost every day. And like, you name the size companies, it doesn't discriminate. It's usually a lot of it is dictated based on the cap table and who actually owns the company.
Yeah. I have to tell you, yesterday I had a conversation with a guy I've known for a while, and he told me what his EBITDA was, and he wanted a 25 multiple. I go, I don't even budge. I don't even like flinch anymore. I go like, do you really think somebody's going to take 25 years to pay off this deal? No.
I know.
Yeah.
I know. It's and I'll introduce a topic if you want, is like how to think about value and valuations, which I have seen very helpful for these entrepreneurs that are becoming M&A entrepreneurs. Is So there's two different ways to think about it. There's what we call intrinsic financial value, which is what is the value of this asset based on the risk of its cash flow. So if it's $1 million in EBITDA and you're saying, hey, it might be worth a 5 or a 6, okay, based on the cash flow, based on me owning it as an investor. Then there's that compares to what we call transaction strategic value, where it starts at the financial value, right? Like if you're going to come buy my company, it's going to start at like, hey, I know that I could do an SBA loan, fund this, or a management buyout, or an ESOP at this valuation. But if there's a strategic buyer, like you were talking about pinning people against each other, they might pay a huge premium because of what they're willing to do with that business and how they get the return. But that's a spread between the intrinsic and then the strategic value. The opposite of that, John, I see all day long too, is, second generation where the family owner or the parents don't need the liquidation event. So they discount it using the IRS rules of lack of liquidity and lack of control up to 35%, and then gift it to the kids with their estate plan. But it started at a noble number. Like it started at this financial valuation based on the risk of the cash flow. And then that's your baseline. If you focus on engineering that financial value to what you want, then everything on the upside is just choices. So you can be sitting at a deal table with you and just going, nope, don't like those terms. Sorry.
Yeah.
I got the clipping coupons.
Let me give you this example again, is he's got actually 3 different cash flows, and they're uniquely separate, but they relate to each other. It's like this one cash flow may buy this product, and this cash flow from this one may buy this product, but it's not necessary because there's so many other options out there. So he's gotten offers from some companies that just wants this cash flow and they kill these 2 others.
Yep.
Right. Or there's another company that made an offer that just wants this one, and they're like, I don't care about those other 2. Right. How do you work with somebody that's done that?
So we have tons of clients that have that set up, and I did it in our old business. We had copiers, managed IT services, document management, all different, essentially P&Ls that rolled up to a consolidated P&L. And like I mentioned, at the one client, he has 9 entities. And the reality is every one of those entities needs to have clean books based on the operations that they're doing. So sorry, one sec. My dog is like losing her mind. Can I pause this for?
Yeah. Let me pause this.
So like I had like an example I gave earlier, that company that's got 9 entities, or like my old business that had the 3. It all starts with clean financials, John. And I was a copier sales guy. Like the fact that I'm sitting here preaching financials, it's really where the game is played and what the levers can be pulled. So if you have every one of those entities that have a clean income statement and saying, okay, what money is going, like what sales are going back and forth, it's where everything gets convoluted that you can't see as each thing stands alone. What is it worth based on the risk of the cash flow that is coming out of that? So if you have a holding company and they've got different services that are getting used, make sure that you're putting the costs of goods or the costs of the SG&A according to what you're doing. And then
whatever the cash flow is for that business.
Yeah, exactly. I had 3 business units and they all shared a bunch of overhead, but I had the correct allocation of the overhead to each of those divisions. And like one of the divisions would have the IT services from the other one, but they had a contract. Well, it was just essentially showing the but they had a management agreement back and forth. Point is, so then once you have that cleanliness there, then you can say, okay, well, let's say there's 3 assets. Like you said, let's say one's worth 1, one's worth 2, and one's worth 4 alone, but maybe the whole thing might be worth 8. And one comes in and says, I want the one that's worth 2. Okay, well, how does that?
Let me stop you, because do you think it's 3 different distinct units? Do you think it's worth some kind of higher multiple, or just this one's, you said 4, 2, and 1?
I'm following you. Like let's take the concept that I have threw at us is intrinsic financial value versus strategic.
Right.
So if we're talking about the risk of the cash flow as the consolidated report, the consolidated financials say, okay, let's say it's 2 million in EBITDA and it's combined of 3 different entities. That 2 million of EBITDA has a certain amount of risk in the cash flow. So let's say we were going to do an ESOP, because an ESOP is based on the financial risk, the discounted cash flow. We say, okay, well, the risk of this whole thing as is, because the ESOP just wants the cash flow, right? So like we're going to yield the valuation that we want based on the risk of the cash flow and the story that we're telling. So great. The math makes sense. The debt payoff makes sense. The warrants make sense. And the valuation makes sense based on the risk and based on the cash flow. So then third party comes out of the woodwork and says, well, I want the second company. Okay. And they're willing to pay something, but they're willing to kill the other two. And it's like, well, how do we compare those two? Now we have a comparison. Well, if you're going to do this, that, let's say you take 700 grand of EBITDA off the 2 million and it's only 1.3, that might have a lower multiple and more risk because you got rid of part of it. Okay. So was there enough value left over after that strategic bought that? It's just, you're kind of just putting the puzzle pieces together and you say, okay, well, maybe that third party is willing to buy one. I've seen this before where they buy one division because they need it so bad because the transaction strategic value for them is so high that they're overpaying based on just the financial value. But that's their deal, right? They're going to roll out.
Yeah. They could say, we could just take your product, your cash flow, and put it in our product 100%. Line, and we will make our money back in a week.
Exactly. And so they might and so yes, you and I that actually might go back to your 27 multiple. That could happen, but it's like a hole in one. It's like that, all the stars align for that to make sense.
Yeah. Well, the reason he reached out to me was after he got these offers. So I know that he didn't like the offers of, somebody separating his business.
Yeah. Well, and I got another client where they've got a unique set of revenue streams that all create one really nice stream of cash flow. Trust me, this is a great business. And there are a bunch of, we've had 4 interviews with different investment bankers. None of them get it. I mean, it's in the online space and they're old school. They don't understand how they all complement each other. And it's like, yeah, these people don't get this, but guess what? The ESOP investment banker totally gets it. And he's like, wait a second, you've been generating this much cash for that long. And this is exactly where it's going. This is a no-brainer.
Yeah. So you just go down this list and go, well, it's probably not a strategic buyer because they'd split it up and throw it away. It's probably not a private equity. But if we can find a search funder or internal or some guy independent or an ESOP, it'll work.
Yeah. And my goal, back to one of your earlier points, is I want everybody to have multiple options. And if you build the value and you concentrate on acquisitions and organic growth to de-risk that cash flow, you can always do whatever sale you want at the discounted cash flow. You don't have to wait on the strategic lucky pull tab or
crazy multiple.
Yeah. But if you get that offer, let's say you were the strategic coming at me and I'm sitting here going, Jen, this thing's worth 10 times my EBITDA because look at what I've got going here. So you're going to pay me way more than that. My 5-year plan is this will be worth this much. You better pay me more than my 5-year plan. Otherwise, we're not having a conversation.
Right. Just move on. Right.
Yeah. I with our CFO clients, we have this ongoing file, this whole model that we have, and it'll be like, sign the end of date, send it over here. We want this valuation. Here's the 5-year forecast with all 3 statements, internal rate of return. If you don't over exceed this, we're not having a discussion. It's just that simple.
Yeah. Let me go back to the part where, somebody is short where they want their goal are, and organically, it's not going to happen. So you're going to have to do it through M&A. What do you guys do to help them do that? I mean, do you go look for companies these are the best? You need IP, you need distribution, you need to go buy a competitor, whatever that, spoken wheel is.
Mm-hmm. So good question. So the way that our model works, they go through the training. Then if they don't have to have onboard a CFO, but if they do, the CFO will onboard, build that model. Like you said, that 3-statement model to show the gap.
Yeah.
Then the next question is, how confident are you in your plan? And then they do what you just said. There's no way I can get there. I can't do 40% year-over-year growth.
Yeah, not going to happen. I get an HVAC company could say 10 at most 15% per year because it just doesn't. No matter how much you spend locally on radio ads or whatever, you're just not going to.
100%.
Yeah.
And it's hard to scale that way. So then you say, okay, well, so to your question about how do we get involved? So the CFO is just like a normal CFO. Like all of our CFOs that came from private equity, done a bunch of M&A. So they're versed in this whole world. So the goal is they're just connecting all the dots with the advisors and the people. So we have a partner that does strategic planning. So we build out the model. And then if they're not confident in their plan, then they should go do a strategic plan, roll that strategic plan into the 3 financial statements, And part of that strategic plan is going to be mergers and acquisitions, like you said. So then it's going to be, what is our investment thesis? Who are we going to target? What geographic location? What is going to diversify our cash flow, de-risk it? So don't just go, like, for example, we had someone in the automotive industry, and it's like, don't go buy more companies in that industry because, like, look at what's going on with microchips and supply chains, like, bad idea. So that whole strategy is then rolled together. Then it's our job our team's job as a CFO, find people like you, work with the CPA, work with the lawyers, work with the business owner. A lot of times the business owner is helping someone like you knock on doors and talk to business owners, but the CFO is doing the CFO's job. And our clients just don't need someone full-time. You know what I mean? Like, that's why they share. One of our
Do you take a piece of, if you help somebody acquire another company, let's say, they're doing 7 million and they go, well, I just found out the direct competitor next state over wants to sell and we can get them for 6 million and I'm at $13 million. Do you take a piece of that, or is it still just training?
It's the training, and then it's the CFO. The goal is, John, like, I felt like everybody was making more money than us when my dad and I were doing all this stuff. So our goal is to help protect the owner's equity at their table and say, to going back to your point about if that gap is there, and let's say they're doing $1 million in EBITDA, and then we find a company for 500 grand in EBITDA. Now we got 1.5. And it's just the traditional multiple arbitrage that you're talking about, but also not just arbitrage, but a good integration plan, which is what my business partner used to do at the old PE firm that he was working for. Is like, we buy all these companies. What do we pay for them? What are we doing first? How do we roll in the payroll, the ERP system, the accounting system, the estimating tool, all that stuff, the CRM goes into the mothership, and then you keep going. So it's really.
So you guys train the CEOs, grown his $7 million company, took 30 years, never made an acquisition. You teach him how to integrate a company. Yeah.
Well, I believe, John, that most business owners, specifically the ones that are willing and open to do training, right? Like, so, like, let's think about this. This is not my stories aren't applicable to the whole marketplace, because there are people that have their head in the sand and they're never taking it out, right? Like, and that's generally the majority, right? So the people that are coming to our training are the people kind of like that go hire someone a trainer at the gym. They're going, I want to get better. So they're disproportionately proactive thinkers. And so they're excited to do this. And I mean, when people go through the training, like, I want to buy assets and sell stock. That's like one of the like phrases that people come out of the training with. But it's M&A is a two-sided game, right? It's just changing the nature of how they view their company as an asset. Then every person that comes through, they're entrepreneurs, they're visionaries, they got ideas, they know what competitors or product lines, they have all this. They just need the financial roadmap to make sure that, like, they don't go broke while they're doing it. Yeah. And I sat there and I showed this Vistage group. I was saying, Tanya, is like, you can have a positive net income in a month and a negative net use of cash. And they just look at me and I'm like, you can grow too fast.
Yeah. Yeah.
And so, like, and the goal is
whatever
like,
shows on your income statement doesn't match what's in your bank.
And everybody knows that. Like, my dad and I, like, at tax time, you're like, son of a, like, what's the bill? Where's that coming from? We're growing.
How do we write that bill when there's, but the income statement shows this? Like, well, yeah.
And the CPA is going, you did good, John.
Yeah. Yeah. So I want to go to how you get deal flow to get customers in there. I mean, how did that transact from just doing this podcast? Because I do a podcast. I'm at 53 episodes. You've done over 300. How does that help? And
there's a book that I read years ago, John, that led me to thinking that this was a good strategy before everybody was locked in their basements in 2020 and doing it. And it was this book called Killing Marketing. I think it was Joe Paluzzi or the same thing.
Killing Marketing. Anytime somebody recommends a book, I write it down and go buy it on Amazon.
And here's the general takeaway is that you should take marketing out of your income statement as a cost, and then create some sort of business that people would pay for because it's so valuable. So good example would be is like Legos. They have movies, they have like the Mall of America displays, and they sell plastic blocks, right? And so when I heard this book, and then also the Seth Godin's book, This Is Marketing, where Seth Godin says in that book, which I really enjoyed, and this was like 5 years ago, And I went down this flashy marketing rabbit hole and spent so much
Oh
money.
yeah, you will never stop spending money if you get caught in that rabbit hole on Amazon and marketing.
I did, man.
It's like you got to at some point you got to cut yourself off. Like, dude, you're addicted. You just got to execute now.
Yeah. Well, that amen to that. And so Seth's book, this is marketing. He said, build your 1,000 disciples, where if you stopped doing what you're doing, they would go, where's Ryan? That's it. It's so damn valuable that people care. So many people just produce shit. And it's like, I don't know, like from day one I'm going to have a very highly valuable conversation once a week. That was it, man. And so to your question about how do we leverage that now is I've learned a lot. I have good relationships and connections from the people I've interviewed. They've introduced me to other people. I've got business partners and clients and stuff that have come from the podcast. I grew up as a copier salesman, man. I go do a presentation. I have a highly valuable presentation. And then hey, by the way, if you like any of this stuff, you can listen to me for 300 hours and then judge whether you like me or not. Honestly, I don't care. I mean, I do care. I want people to like me and I want to provide value, but if it's not a fit, you can listen to me and get to know me without having to write a huge check and risk, failing at your projects.
That is Frank Kern's you're pre-framing yourself before they're forming an opinion of you before they even meet you by listening to 300 hours of your podcast.
Yeah. I mean, the amount of times people have called and said, I've listened to you for 2 years now. And I'm like, they literally, John, just come in and it's like, they know me. I'm like, I've never talked to you before, but so to your point is now it helps get speaking gigs. It now helps, work with other channel partners, clients, but also to your point about deal flow. I mean, because we have a very specific model, and this is where we could, offline, we can talk about ways to refer different people to each other, but because we've got training and CFO services, people call me that are looking to sell right now or looking to buy, not ideal clients of ours. So I can push them to other people. So I get people every day.
Yeah, that's a broker, right?
Yeah. Right. It's just a LinkedIn inbound or whatever it is. And I'm like, okay, well, you need this person. You wanted this person, a wealth manager over here, an investment banker over here. We're not any of those things. We have two very distinct, we have a path for people that are looking for training and then, acquisitions and then eventually an exit at some point. That's our perfect fit. But a lot of other people consume the content, which makes good relationships like yourself say, hey, do you want some referrals? And then it builds other relationships.
Yeah. I love it. Do you have any products? This is really curious because I'm following this new guy called Justin Welsh, who, have you seen him? Oh, he just sells this $150 product, how to use LinkedIn and copywriting. And he sold, I don't know, now it's 5,000 pieces, a couple $1 million, but it's just kind of flipped the funnel on its head where you had the ClickFunnels guys, where you go through this funnel, upsell, cross-sell, downsell. He just goes, look, there's 800 million people on LinkedIn, right? Sell a $99 product, get a couple 5,000 of them, and then at some point later, sell another product. And then all of those 5,000 people will come to you and want to do business with you.
I mean, so our Flywheel, so we have our own strategic plan. We built into our financial plan as we're building our company. And the first part of the Flywheel is create highly valuable, timely, relevant, free content. Yeah. Like the podcast and all the videos that we have, which leads to paid training. I mean, the paid training, John, is $1,000 for do-it-yourself and $3,000 for 4 calls with me and accountability calls over a month. So that's paid training. So it's not much, right? When you think about the people we're talking to, then that leads to CFO service clients. And as we have CFO service clients, I get to see inside of all of these companies of truly what they're worth, what's going on, what their problems are that lead us to build free, highly valuable, timely, relevant content to help us create new training products. So on the docket for 2023 is a financial literacy boot camp that literally dozens of our clients and customers have asked for. So it's gonna be $5,000, 2 days.
Yeah, this is when you say that. It's I'm running a $10 million business and I need some financial literacy, right? And it's so true. When you say preaching to the choir, I used to work for Intuit, business development for Intuit. I saw thousands of income statements, cash flow statements, balance sheet. It tells a story. I don't even have to see you, hear your story. Those documents tell me a story on how you're running your business.
100%. And this is where when I do that presentation, and we wouldn't have gotten to this point without the Flywheel I just talked about, which is the podcast, then the paid training, then the CFO clients, and then everybody's saying, oh my God, can you guys create this? Sure. we'll create this, and we've already got it pretty much prepaid for. But it's an obvious thing. And the amount of times, going back to your point about the story, entrepreneurs through acquisitions, through their strategies, I'm truly confident that entrepreneurs and business owners know what they're doing and they can see clearly the vision.
Yeah, I would never underestimate
they can't connect it, like you said, though, financially. Because I said, do you want to be in charge of the story that your business is telling or not? Yes. Like, I mean, when we were trying to turn the business around, I'd sit down and another bank would come in and I'm like, all right, here's the whiteboard, and I'd have bubble charts and like, here's how the entities work. And then a bank would leave. And I did that 17 different banks. I mean, like, exhausting versus being able to understand how the numbers work and then tell the story and say, see, told you. Oh, and by the way, if you're questioning my execution, budget to actual every single month was within 1% of each other. I can predict the future and I execute like hell. And here's the story.
Yeah.
I mean, the
and
numbers
that's because the desire to go to a next level, let's say they plateaued, right? And then they need a new coach to go to the next plateau. It's like somebody told me this, that, Michael Phelps, 20 plus, you never had the same coach, right? You have the coach when you're in grade school, middle school, high school, college, and an Olympic coach, all different coaches because they expand your mindset a little bit differently.
100%. I just interviewed this woman that's a high performance coach for entrepreneurs and athletes actually on the show. And like, we as human beings can only like push it forward really a few degrees. We can't like reinvent ourselves completely tomorrow. I mean, it's like almost traumatic, right? So like, to your point, it's like, how do we incrementally get better? You can't go from $1 million to $100 million company tomorrow. Like, this is where like, I think private equity will at some point, the industry will have a reckoning where like, I mean, how many times I talk to these PE firms, well, I bought 17 companies in 24 months. And then we just handed this big flaming pile of shit onto a strategic buyer that bought all. Zero systems are integrated, zero culture. Like, it was like, great. Like, all that worked in the spreadsheet, but you have to like actually do it. So like, my point about that is, you can, on a spreadsheet, you can go 0 to 100 real fast, but like, then there's real life where you have to like incrementally get better. And then you're essentially constantly building a new equilibrium, right? You're like, so this is my new habits, like kind of the atomic habits, right? This is, you ever read that book, Atomic Habits, James Clear?
I haven't, but I'm writing it down. He
calls it habit stacking. So once you have a really good routines and habits, you just start stacking shit on top of each other. And it's a lot easier to continue to execute because you're not reinventing everything. Like, I mean, the amount of times I hear people like, we're on the 70-day challenge. And they tell me what they're doing in 70 days. I'm like, you're reading a book a day. You're doing this things with your workout and your diet and your meditation. You're like, you're not going to keep any of that shit after day 70. Like, how much of that stuff you want to keep? Wouldn't you rather just slowly get the right stuff to have like an actual change over time?
Yeah. Tim Ferriss talks about that smaller achievable goals, precursors, small wins are precursors to the big wins.
Well, that's where to your point about the coach, making sure you identify what is your weakness, help that coach get you up to that next rung of the ladder.
Yeah. Is there any people you just turned down aside from the fact that hey, I want to exit now, but the personalities where you have to match? Because we're in this stage of the industry where you just want to pick people you like and trust and want to do business with.
Yeah. In the training, it doesn't matter. I mean, people can go through the training and we want everybody to learn. For the CFO services, you're absolutely right. The people that like, first of all, I'm recruiting what we call unicorn CFOs because they were in, private equity, making a bunch of money or whatever, working 80, 90 hours a week. And they're going, I want to make a difference now that I've made my money, I wanted to go in and help really move the needle for people. So they're coming and working for us to make a difference for others. And their currency, oddly enough, even though they're highly paid, is they love affirmation because they love being able to help people. And so when people don't listen, they hate it. Honestly, if you think about a trainer, if I was training you, I'm like, dude, John walked into the gym smoking a cigarette and eating a Big Mac again. Like, damn it. Like, are we gonna make progress, John, or not? Like, as a trainer, I want you to succeed. And if you're not, you set your goals. And if you're not willing to do the hard work to help get you to the goals, I don't want to help you. And that's kind of the way that our CFOs think.
Beautiful. Ryan, up on 3 minutes before an hour. So I really appreciate the time being on top M&A Entrepreneurs Podcast.
Thank you so much, John. This has been a blast.